The Legend of Bloodfield Farm. It was just another ordinary night. Four friends lounged in the cluttered living room of a college apartment, their faces lit by the glow of their phones, until the algorithm, cruel and cunning, served them that video. An old episode of the podcast Rural Mysteries titled The Bloodfield Disappearances When the Land Speaks. The narrator's deep voice crackled through the speakers as grainy archive footage flickered on the TV, yellowed newspaper clippings, blurry photos of farm families, the kind of stuff that looked straight out of a cheap horror movie. Between 1983 and 1991, 9 people vanished without a trace near the Blackwood family's cornfield, the voice intoned, as eerie statistics flashed on screen. Witnesses reported hearing nighttime chanting between the stalks, and the few who dared enter after sundown were never the same. It was the kind of story everyone knew, an overblown urban legend, a campfire tale to scare kids or dumb tourists. Lucas, the group's biggest skeptic, let out a dry laugh before tossing a peanut into his mouth. "Oh, sure, and I bet the farmer's ghost still clocks in at the barn every morning, right?" The others chuckled, but there was something in the silence that followed, in the way the screen glitched for a split second, as if the video itself hesitated before continuing. That's when Marina, always the instigator, leaned forward with a dangerous grin. "If it's all fake, why don't we go there? Tonight, to prove it's bullshit." The challenge hung in the air. They exchanged glances. Lucas, of course, wouldn't back down. Tiago, the quiet one, just shrugged, and Julia, the only one who seemed uneasy, bit her lip before muttering a nervous, screw it, what's the worst that could happen?" What started as a joke, a cheap thrill for the night, was already twisting into something else. Because urban legends, my friends, are never just stories, they're warnings. And this one had a detail the podcast conveniently left out. Every single missing victim had laughed at the legend too before they disappeared. Little did they know, in just a few hours, the cornfield would be waiting, not for explorers, but for honored guests, because that year's harvest was overdue, and the land was hungry. It was supposed to be easy. A dare, a stupid bet, walk into the field, film some dumb clips for Instagram, and leave laughing, proving it was all just an urban legend. But the Blackwood family's cornfield had other plans. The first signs came quietly, almost as if the field was testing their patience. Lucas's GPS, which he'd sworn was the most accurate on the market, glitched first. The blue dot representing them spun slowly in circles like a top about to fall. "What the hell?" he muttered, smacking his phone as if that would help. The screen flickered once, twice, before displaying a single static message. "Signal lost." Thiago noticed the pattern first. "Guys, we've passed this tree 3 times. He pointed to a gnarled trunk at the field's edge, its branches twisted like skeletal fingers. No one wanted to admit it, but they all remembered. The same tree, the same peeling red paint stain on the bark. Then the sounds began. At first, just distant rustling that could have been the wind. Then footsteps, clear, heavy, keeping pace with them, always slightly behind, always just out of sight. Marina stopped dead. "Did you hear that?" Silence. When they turned, flashlight beams cutting through the dark, there were only the cornstalks swaying gently. Except now they seemed closer, denser, as if they'd moved when no one was looking. The once wide aisles between rows now narrowed into twisting paths, dry leaves brushing their arms like eager fingers. And the worst part? The footsteps didn't stop. Now they came from 2 sides, then 3. When Julia finally screamed, "Run!" nobody asked why. Because they all heard what could no longer be ignored, something big moving fast through the stalks, trampling plants in its path and getting closer. The field didn't want them there. The field never wanted visitors, only harvest. They ran until their lungs burned. When they finally collapsed, gasping for air in the moonlit clearing, it was Marina who saw it first. "Gee guys." Her trembling finger pointed ahead. Nothing could have prepared them. 7 scarecrows. Not the harmless kind made of straw and old clothes. These were wrong. Profoundly wrong. They stood in a perfect circle like sentinels guarding some ancient rite. Their skeletal bodies were woven from gnarled branches, bound with ropes that looked disturbingly like dried tendons. But the heads stopped their hearts cold. Pumpkins, each carved with human faces, not the silly Halloween grins. These expressions were too real. mouths frozen in silent screams, brows furrowed in eternal torment, deep grooves like never-ending tears. "Oh God," Julia choked, stumbling back. "They look like they're in pain." Then Lucas's flashlight beam hit the seventh figure. Thiago vomited instantly. This one wasn't wearing farmer's overalls, a faded college hoodie, designer sneakers, and sweet Jesus, a chain with a pendant Marina recognized immediately. That's Carlos's necklace. Carlos, the friend who'd vanished after the forest party last month. Police said he'd run off with some girl, yet here he stood, or what remained. The pumpkin head bore his features, the slightly crooked nose, the childhood scar above the eyebrow. And when the wind howled through the clearing, they all swore the hollow eyes of all seven figures blinked in unison. The circle wasn't a warning, it was an invitation. And judging by how the cornstalks began whispering behind them, the field had already chosen its next participants. The silence after discovering Carlos's scarecrow hung thick like a wet blanket. Then, cutting through the oppressive stillness, a voice pierced the night. "Help me, please." They all froze. It was Carlos's voice, unmistakable, that same hoarse tone, the slight slur he'd get after too many drinks. It came from somewhere to their right, deep within the densest part of the corn. "Carlos?" Marina called out, her flashlight beam shaking as she thrust it forward. "Carlos?" The response came closer this time, but wrong. "Find me, hurry, before Itit finds me." It was Carlos's voice, yes, but stretched thin, syllables dragging like a warped record, vowels multiplying into echoes. Lucas locked eyes with the others, his expression screaming what none would say aloud. Nothing human could make that sound, yet they ran toward it anyway. Cornstalks lashed at their arms like bony fingers trying to restrain them. With each step, the voice grew clearer, more urgent and more distorted. "Please, static, don't look back. It's coming." When they finally reached the source, there was no Carlos, just a small clearing where the stalks formed a natural chamber. And that's when the voice changed. Suddenly, it wasn't one voice anymore. It was dozens. A chorus of whispers speaking in unison, words in no recognizable language, guttural sounds with consonants that scraped against their skulls. Some resembled reversed audio recordings, others like children poorly mimicking adult speech. The voices came from the surrounding stalks, from the branches above, from the earth beneath their feet. Thiago collapsed to his knees, hands clamped over his ears. "That's not him!" he screamed. That's when they understood the true horror. The voices weren't trying to scare them. They were practicing, learning, preparing to lure the next victim with a voice they'd trust. And from somewhere deep in the cornfield, something began to laugh. A wet, rasping sound that didn't belong to any of them. Yet, the wind howled through the cornstalks like a chorus of lost souls when Julia stumbled upon the buried object. Her foot struck something solid, not a rock, but something that didn't belong in that soil. With trembling hands, she clawed at the damp earth until her fingers found sun-baked leather. A journal. The cover was blackened by time, but the symbol burned into its surface remained visible. A sheaf of wheat entwined with what might have been veins or roots. "Look at this," she whispered, the pages crumbling like dead leaves as she opened it. The first entry dated back to 1883. "The harvest has failed again. The Reverend says it's God's punishment, but old Blackwood knows the truth. This land is different. It sleeps, and when it wakes, it must be fed." Page after page documented plagues and droughts until October 1891, when the handwriting turned frantic. It worked. We offered the drifter who slept in our barn, and by morning, sprouts already broke the soil. His blood flowed for less than an hour, yet the corn grew 3 inches by sundown. Lucas flipped through increasingly stained pages until he found the final revelation. An entry scrawled in shaky letters pressed so hard they tore the paper. "We were wrong. It doesn't want strangers anymore, my little girl. Oh God, it took my Abigail last night. I found her favorite dress on the center scarecrow. The corn has never grown so tall, and now I hear her singing between the stalks. The earth will never be satisfied." Loose sheets slipped from the journal. Sepia photographs, none of them wanted to understand. Men in overalls holding pitchforks posed around figures tied to posts. Except upon closer look, those weren't straw effigies. They were people, living people. with carved pumpkins shoved over their heads, their bodies twisted into poses mimicking the very scarecrows now surrounding the group. And on the last photo, faded and stained brown, a single word scribbled on the back: harvest. That's when they realized the whispers in the field weren't the wind. They were the previous ones, and the ritual had never ended. It was only waiting for new participants. The scream cut through the night like a scythe. One moment, Lucas was there beside them, flashlight cutting through the darkness. The next, whoosh, his light vanished into the corn with a rustle of dry leaves and snapping stalks. Lucas! Marina reached the clearing first, the others close behind, their pounding hearts nearly drowning out the wrongness of the sounds coming from the corn. Not just footsteps, something dragging, something rooting. What they found made Julia vomit instantly. Lucas had been planted in the earth, not metaphorically, literally. His legs had fused with the soil, skin cracking like tree bark, dark veins spreading across the ground like thirsty roots. His arms were stretched outward, vines twisting them into impossible angles, perfect replicas of the straw-filled scarecrow limbs they'd seen earlier. But the worst part, oh God, the worst part was his mouth, stretched wide in a silent scream, lips splitting like corn husks as green shoots erupted from his throat, growing, pushing between his teeth like vegetative tongues. His eyes, still human, still aware, followed them in pure terror, eyelids fluttering as tiny roots began sprouting from their corners. Then came the cracks. His fingers elongated, dried, transformed into gnarled twigs. His clothes merged with his flesh, becoming aged rags. His face, dear God, his face faded to a sickly yellow, flesh tightening, hardening, until only a pumpkin-like caricature remained, forever frozen in agonized silence. The wind blew. The new scarecrow swayed slightly on its flesh and bone post, its arms creaking like old wood, and from somewhere deep in the cornfield, something whispered in satisfaction. Because the harvest, after all, must always continue, and the field was still hungry. Julia didn't stop running until asphalt pounded beneath her feet. There it was, her car, abandoned by the roadside like some divine mercy. The keys still jingled in her pocket, though her bloodied hands shook so violently she could barely turn the ignition. The engine roared to life. She accelerated without looking back, headlights cutting through the darkness like a dull knife. In the rearview mirror, only the cornfield swayed in the wind, waving to her. I'm free, she thought, knuckles whitening on the wheel. God, I'm free. Then she passed the second field, and the third, and the fourth, each one filled with scarecrows, different from before. These wore torn hoodies and designer sneakers, and their heads, oh Christ, their heads bore faces she recognized. Lucas, eyes frozen in eternal terror. Thiago, mouth agape in a soundless scream. Marina, her hair still in the ponytail Julia had helped tie that afternoon. The car radio, silent until now, erupted with static that nearly made Julia swerve off the road. You are static. The next, seed. The voice wasn't human, wasn't even a voice. It sounded like dozens, maybe hundreds of parched throats speaking as one, some familiar, others completely alien. Generations of whispers. When Julia finally dared glance at the field to her right, she saw all the scarecrows, hundreds of them, had turned toward the road, toward her. And worse, much worse, the scarecrows nearest the fence were moving, not swaying in the wind, walking, crawling, dragging twisted branch limbs toward the highway as the radio whispered again, now in perfect clarity. Welcome to the harvest. The last frame the dashcam captured before the crash showed the speedometer needle spinning past its limit, Julia's wide eyes in the rear view, and something impossibly tall rising behind her among the endless rows of corn.